Welcome to a beginner's intro to Kerbal Space Program. In this series, we're learning the absolute basics of Kerbal Space Program from the point of view of a complete beginner trying out the game for the first time. Let's dive into Episode 2. Welcome back to Kerbal Space Program. So in this episode, we're going to continue from the point of view of an absolute beginner who's basically brand new to the game. We're going to explore some basic concepts around the science progression in the game, and we're going to take a look at getting a jump start on your science before you really get too far into the actual progression. So as we talked about in Episode 1, Kerbal Space Program uses a tech tree, and you proceed up through it. There are a couple of different barrier points at 90 science and 500 science where you have to upgrade the research center before you can actually research the technology past that point. So there is a limit to how much science that you can accumulate and thus like the types of parts you can unlock. Before you really advance the game, to get more funds through contracts. So what we're going to do is we're going to explain the concept of biomes really quickly. So I'm going to launch a vessel just to get into the map view. It doesn't even really matter what. Now this is the only use of the cheat menu that I'm going to use in these videos, and I'm going to do this just to get a visual illustration of something. So if we bring up the cheat menu, we're going to do biomes visible. Now what this is going to do is it's going to show us the different biomes on the map. Now what biomes are locations that you can collect science from. So if you look here, here's our little capsule and our Kerbal Space Center, right? This tan area on the beach is the shores biome. So if we, for example, do the goo experiment, we'll collect the goo experiment from the shores biome and get 5 science points. Well, if we land over here or drive or fly or whatever and get into this green area, this is going to be, I think, the grasslands. So if we do the goo experiment here, it'll do goo experiment from the grasslands for a fresh 5 points, or around. I don't remember the exact number, but for a new total of points before the diminishing returns kick in. And then you have highlands and mountains, and over on the other side there's desert, and the polar ice caps are all distinct biomes. And also on other planetary bodies, like here's the moon. You can see there are different biomes on the moon. There's these highlands. There's this canyon. Some of these different craters have a unique biome that you can do science there and get the full amount from the experiments. So that's the idea with biomes. And one of the core things to do in progression is as you unlock the technology for new science experiments, you can go through and revisit places you've been already to do the new experiments there to gain fresh science from an old location, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do, just to demonstrate this real quick, we're going to do just a quick little rocket here. I'm just going to assemble this very quickly with 2 goo experiments. Nothing fancy. And we don't have any kind of decouplers or nothing, so this is going to be the simplest rocket we can make, and we'll check our staging. Nice and simple. Okay. It doesn't matter what we call it. So we're going to launch. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to launch this off into the water. Kerbal's oceans are their own distinct biomes. So I'm here, crew report. We've already done the crew report from the launch pad, so there's no more science to be had. And the goo experiment Diminishing returns have kicked in. 0.2 science. Oh, that sucks, but we'll take it because it's all there is. I'll turn on my stability assist, get my resources up just like it was going to be a real mission, and except this time, I'm going to fly off towards the water. Off into the ocean. Alright, can turn the stability assist off to preserve some battery. Turn our speed warp up just to bleed off speed a little bit. And we don't want to lawn dart into the water, so we'll pop our parachute. Speed up again. This is just so we're going to be able to land. And of course, now that we're flying, you'll notice I can do a crew report. Flying over Kerbal's water is a situation we can be in, because the water is the biome, and the situation is flying over it. There's also landed in it. Not all of the experiments make the differentiation between flying over and, like, touching the ground, but the crew report is one of them. So I'm not going to do anything with that for right now. We're just going to go and splash down into the water. Okay, so now we are splashed down in the water, and we're going to do observe mystery goo. So here, the goo experiment in Kerbal's water, and you're going to see the full 4 science. So we're going to do that, and it's going to start the diminishing return all over again. So we could launch another mission out here to get a little bit more, and we'll do the crew report for a fresh 2 science, and we'll recover that. So that's the concept of biomes. Now you're already thinking, obviously the application of that is just to launch some of these real basic rockets off into different places. But we're going to take this a step further, and we're going to cheese the system a little bit, again, without cheating. So let's clear out our messages. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our research and development. We're going to unlock a couple of the entry-level technologies. So we have 30 science now. So we can unlock Engineering 101. We can get Basic Rocketry, that'll matter later. Survivability. And that's all we're really going to be able to get for now, because all the rest of these cost a little bit more. But that's fine. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to notice we have a couple more science experiments we can run. So, we're not going to do a full mission or anything like that. All we're going to do is just make sure that we've got our science from the launch pad really quick. So now we have the barometer experiment, 3.6 science. That's not bad. And we'll do our thermometer for 2.4. That's not bad. So just for going out to the launch pad, we just got... Look at all that science. Just for going out to the launch pad. Well, we're going to take things a step further, and we're going to step up our game. The secret to this is that each of the buildings in the Kerbal Space Center counts as its own biome. So you can do, for example, the goo experiment on the runway. You can do the goo experiment at the vehicle assembly building. You can do the goo experiment at your runway. You can do the goo experiment all over the place. And the same thing for all the other science experiments we have. So we're going to go through and we're going to make this simple little craft, if you can really call it that. And what this is going to do for us is basically just roll around off the edge of the runway down onto the grasslands biome, so that we can take all of our science that we're going to be collecting from here. Oop. There we go. Oh, I already got that. So we're going to take all of our science that we're going to be getting from here, and we're going to double it up. So that's the basic idea of what we're going to be doing. And the reason this works is that each one of these command pods on this little vehicle, we're going to call it Science Roller 1, is basically just being a battery. Now, if you remember, we mentioned before that the command pods have torque. They have one of those reaction wheels on them. It's like that gyroscope. The reaction wheels up here, and we can turn that off. We're going to leave it normal. And they also have some electric charge. So really, these are going to be serving as batteries, just to provide enough power to roll off the side of the runway into the dirt. Because the area off to the side, you can see, where the runway sort of ends. This area off over here counts as Kerbin's shores, not the runway. So just by rolling sideways, we can increase our science output by a good margin. So we'll go through and grab all of this science, and whichever one of these has our Kerbal in it, there we go. Now we're also going to do an EVA. If we highlight our crew member down in the bottom right, we can do an EVA. He's literally just going to crawl out on top. Now, we're not landing on the moon or anything, so an EVA isn't very exciting. He just literally gets out. However, if we right-click on something with science in it, we can do take data, and he will retrieve that science and carry it with him. And also, we can do an EVA report. And then board the capsule, and that'll now all be scientific data stored in the capsule. However, you're going to notice we can do the crew report again without overwriting the old one. So that's a very important little procedure to get accustomed to. So now I'm literally just going to carefully roll off of the side of the runway here. You don't want to go too fast because the physics engine in Kerbal Space Program isn't perfect, and if you go too fast, you can hit that little incline with a little bit too much power and cause your stuff to explode. So that's not good. So you see, we've already got it. We've got the crew report from Kerbin's Shores. Here's going to be our mystery goo from Kerbin's Shores. We'll do our EVA. And that'll be an EVA report from Kerbin's Shores. And we'll do our barometer and our thermometer. Oh. Help if I clicked on the right one. So that should give us a good chunk of science, and we're going to do the science roller one more time, but we're going to do it from the regular rocket launch pad. Look at that, we're already up to 37 science. So we're going to open from the spaceplane hangar, Science Roller 1. And we're going to launch it. Now, off the side of the launch pad, if we roll in the direction of the rest of the Kerbal Space Center, if we roll in this direction, this area here is actually a biome of its own, the Crawler Way. And it's not too far. So we can get there with very little risk of any sort of explosion, and just making sure that we don't have any diminishing returns and we've done all of our experiments there. So we can roll over there with very little risk of any kind of explosion or bump in the road, and we can also go over there without any risk of running out of electric power, because again, we don't have unlimited electricity. And this isn't an exact science. You're going to notice that we're not rolling exactly straight. That's okay. We just have to be really careful when we get over to that bump there. And you can't see it on the screen, but what I'm doing for this roll is I'm just tapping. I'm tapping Q, which is, your yaw axis control. I'm just tapping it. I'm not holding it down because that'll spin way too fast and my little vehicle here will bounce and land and bounce and land a couple of times and just explode. And I don't want that. All right, so that's about as far as I'm going to go. And here we're on the crawlerway. All right, that's excellent. So we're going to do all these experiments from the crawlerway. And we can't really steer our little science roller here. So we can't really explore the rest of the Kerbal Space Center with this. However, there are other ways to accomplish that we will look at later. But so just by doing our 2 science rollers and not really completing any contracts, we've already bumped ourselves up to 52 science. Well, that's great. Let's see what we can do in here. We can unlock a whole bunch of useful stuff. Now, what I'm going to be going for to start off is basic science. And the reason is this unlocks a battery and a science module. The science module is another science experiment, so that'll have a multiplier effect and allow each of our missions to gather even more science. Now, I'm not going to repeat this 100 times, but from this point, you can go through and redo everything we just did with this science container just to get a bunch of extra science. I'm only going to do this from the launch pad and the runway just to demonstrate. But if you want to cheese a little bit more, you can conduct that material study for 7.5 science everywhere we've already been and redo those previous rockets and stuff. And when I'm playing through a career mode game on my own, not recording a video for time, I will go through and do that at this point. As soon as I unlock the science container, I go through and I do the science rollers, I launch out into the water, I launch rockets out into the grassland, you know, I do all that stuff. And I get that science container to everywhere that I can, because that 7.5 science adds up real quick. There we go. So look at that. 22 more science just from unlocking a part. Is that enough to get us anything? It is. It's enough to get us general rocketry or stability. Well, I'm going to go with general rocketry just for right now, and the reason I'm going to do that is for these engine parts. And these are going to make it possible to do our next contract, which is going to be escape the atmosphere. Now, you can also take a whole bunch of these other contracts. Some of these, like the observational surveys, are going to be more suited if you're doing aircraft instead of rockets, which I'm not going to go over in this video series, but maybe in a different one. You can also do some part tests, and I'm not going to go over those here, but what these basically involve is that you take this part into the situation here, flying at Kerbin between these altitudes, between these speeds. You right-click on the part, and there'll be an option for conduct test. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a rocket up into space. Now, very important thing we just unlocked is decoupler. What the decoupler does is it physically separates... Oop, I almost forgot a heat shield. The decoupler physically separates parts of our rocket. You know, we talked a little bit about rocket staging. The decoupler can be used literally just to decouple what's above and what's below it. So, almost forgot something important. There we go. So we're going to be able to use that decoupler after we launch this capsule up into the air to split it off from the rocket below it, which will discard the dead weight. And that can be a very useful thing to do. Okay. So just to demonstrate this real quick, we're not going to get too fancy. However, we are going to collect a little bit of science. All right, let's check our staging. Stage 1 is going to be the booster, then the decoupler, then the parachute. Good. So let's launch. Now, the objective with this flight is going to be just to gather some science data from flying in the air. We mentioned the situation of flying above like these different biomes. So we're just going to launch up, and we're not even really doing much at the moment, but while we're flying at Kerbal, we can gain science from these experiments. And I'm going to close that door just to make it a little bit more aerodynamic. The game does actually track that. And we'll log our temperature and do our goo. And do our crew report. Now, I'm going to hit my spacebar to do my staging into the decoupler, and it just dumps the dead weight. And so now I just have this. And we're just going to speed up time a little bit. And if you hit M for map, you can see it'll show us our flight trajectory. We're almost at the peak. We peaked at about 57,000 meters, maybe closer to 58 or 59,000. So we didn't quite actually make it into space, but we are in the upper atmosphere. So we could do all those science experiments if we had a second one. We could do them here to get an extra round of science. I'm not going to on this flight, though. What I'm going to do is make sure we're pointed straight down. And once we get a bit lower, we're going to drop that parachute. The reason I wait so long to drop the parachute is just so that we're not waiting for the rocket to descend. You can pop your parachutes a lot higher than I actually do, in these missions I'm demonstrating here. And there are times where you'd want to, especially if you have a rocket that's a little bit more heavy or something. That was something interesting that we're going to talk about in a second. But the reason I'm doing the parachutes low is just to speed up, making these videos. So what just happened? Where's our science module there? Well, we landed a little bit too hard. That one parachute wasn't enough to slow us down because we were a little bit too heavy. So we came in hot and we landed at a higher force than that part was able to tolerate. There's an internal stat for each of the parts. Their maximum crash rating, and that exceeded the structural integrity of my part, so it exploded and it's gone, and we've lost those 7.5 science. So that's I was mentioning, there are situations where it can be advantageous to slow down. That's definitely one of them. And if we look at our messages, world first milestones, we broke a speed record and an altitude record, so that's always good. However, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab our next bit of science, and we are going to escape the atmosphere. And hopefully, we are going to do it a little bit more safely. So let's take a look and see what kind of parts we just unlocked. Well, we have landing legs now. That's interesting. Well, look at that. That should provide a little something to cushion our landing. Additionally, what we're going to do is we're going to put a second science module in there, throwing that away for right now. And we're going to redo our experiments here a little bit. Oop. There we go. We're going to make room for a couple of drogue parachutes. Now what these do, drogue parachutes are going to slow our rocket down a little bit before we open the main parachute, and we're going to make them their own separate stage. And if you right-click on the drogue parachute, you can change the altitude they deploy and the pressure needed to deploy them. Spread angle isn't something you have to worry about for right now. That's more important if you have a larger vehicle with a lot of parachutes. So we're also going to go and give ourselves a couple of batteries. Whoop, not that many. And we'll clip those in. Another thing to keep in mind, down here on our engineer's report, it's going to show us our parts count and our weight. Remember that we haven't yet upgraded our vehicle assembly building or our launch pad. So we have a maximum of 30 parts and a maximum weight of 18 tons. And of course there are like size dimensional weights and all that. But it's not going to be super important for right now. Right now, we are just going to escape the atmosphere. So we're going to take a couple of these liquid fuel rocket tanks. We're going to take the swivel liquid fuel rocket engine, another stage decoupler, make that into one stage so that when we jettison the stage below, it'll fire this at the same time, and a solid rocket booster with some fins on it for stability. So that's within all of our parts counts, just barely, 26 out of 30 parts. This should be easily enough to get us into space and we'll call it Upgoer 1. This will easily be enough to get us into space. Not into orbit, but we'll break the Kármán line, leave the atmosphere, and complete that contract. And with luck, those landing legs will cushion our impact a bit, combined with the drogue parachutes slowing us down. So what we're going to do is just launch. Now what I'm going to do here, as we go up, the planet is actually going to be rotating underneath us. So I'm going to use my W key to pitch down forward kind of in this direction, a tiny little bit. Not much, because we're only using our reaction wheel from our capsule at the moment, our gyroscope. You're going to see we're just barely starting to tilt. But that's going to make sure that we're going to be landing in the right spot. So our solid fuel rocket booster's burnt out. My throttle is at maximum. I'm going to hit space again, and that stages into this liquid rocket. This liquid rocket engine has a gimbal, so I can actually steer it with the controls. And again, I'm going to try and point it kind of 45 degrees northward. And this is going to make sure that, again, if we hit M, we'll see our rocket is traveling north. And that should easily be enough to get us up into space. I'm going to kill my throttle for good measure, and I'm going to hit space. That'll stage us out and jettison the dead weight. Now, we are flying high above Kerbal right now, which is a situation we can get in the upper atmosphere that we can get some science from. So the Kármán line is at 70,000 meters. So if we do some of the science... Oop, forgot about that. So if we do some of that science below the 70,000 meters, we won't technically be in space. Now, we just crossed into space. We are not in orbit, but we are actually up in space right now, right above the cutoff. So doing these experiments, material study while in space near Kerbal. All right. So we have escaped the atmosphere. We'll close the doors. We'll do all of our stuff. And you're going to notice we're getting more science for doing these experiments up in space than we were from sitting on the launch pad. And that's not really much of a surprise if you think about it. That makes sense. Okay, so we've got all of our science there. And if we check our messages, look at that. We've set an altitude record, we've reached space, and a land distance record showing that we're moving horizontally. And we've also completed contracts. So we're going to dump all that. Escape the atmosphere. Okay. So now we're going to speed up. Now this is kind of important. When we're coming back down into the atmosphere, we're going to turn on our stability assist. And I'm going to use the WASD to maneuver my capsule to make sure that I'm coming into the atmosphere directly backwards. So we're going to orient our little directional dot with the circle and the X through it, showing our retrograde direction. And the reason we're doing that is so that this heat shield we placed on the bottom of the craft is going to absorb most of the heat energy and stop it from transferring up into these science containers, which will explode from the heat. And uh-oh, look at that. We tumbled out of control. That's not good. So there's a pretty reasonable chance that one of our parts could explode there. Not always, but that will happen sometimes. Okay, good. So not all craft are aerodynamically stable, so that was a learning experience there. Now you see over on the left, our drogue chutes are white, so I'm going to stage into those. And when those go off, it sets us up. We're going to be coming back in oriented correctly again. I'm going to hit G to drop those landing legs. And I'll turn on my stability assist again for another second, just so we're not going to drain our batteries dry. That'll just straighten us out. And once we get a little bit closer to the ground, I will pop my main parachute and slow us down even more. Oh, and even that was enough to blow up one of the science containers. So there's a good learning experience there. So recover vessel. Okay, so we made a whole bunch of science out of that mission. We got into space, we completed a contract, we got 92 science, which we can use to do all sorts of fun stuff with these different science discoveries here. And we completed our contract to get into space. The next objective we're going to be going for is orbit Kerbal. However, that's going to be a little bit more complicated of a topic, so that's going to be covered in episode 3. This was the foundations of the way that scientific progression works and how you can collect science through different biomes, and designing and launching a rocket to escape Kerbin's atmosphere and get into space above the Kármán line. As always, thanks for watching.